March 17, 1980. The capital of Minas Gerais was in the midst of a period of intense urbanization and population growth. The city center thrummed with the energy of workers and merchants who filled the streets of the metropolis's financial heart each day. It was against this backdrop that Roberto Carlos Mendes, a respected 42-year-old merchant and owner of a small electrical supply store on Amazonas Avenue, vanished without a trace. Roberto was known for his almost obsessive punctuality. He lived alone in a modest apartment in the Serra neighborhood, about 4 kilometers from the city center, ever since his divorce 3 years prior. On that particular Monday, the sky dawned overcast with a fine drizzle typical of the early autumn in Minas Gerais. At 7:15 a.m., as was his custom, Roberto left his home wearing a gray suit, carrying his brown leather briefcase and a black umbrella. He was seen by the building's doorman, Sebastião Ferreira, who would later report to the authorities that this was the last time he ever saw the merchant. Roberto's routine was invariable. He would have coffee at the bakery on the corner of Rua dos Carijos, arrive at his store around 8 o'clock a.m., have lunch at the Papagayo restaurant at 12:30 p.m., and return to work until 7 o'clock p.m., when he would close up shop. On that day, however, something shattered this routine. Roberto never made it to the store. His employee, 25-year-old José Antonio da Silva, found the delay unusual. His boss had never missed a day of work without notice. "I waited until 9 o'clock, José told the authorities. "I called his house several times, but no one answered. I found it very strange because Mr. Roberto was extremely responsible and was never late." At the end of the day, José decided to report the disappearance at the downtown police station. It was Roberto's sister, Maria Helena Mendes, a 38-year-old municipal school teacher, who formalized the police report. "My brother had no enemies. He was a discreet, hardworking man. He was never involved in anything illicit. He had no vices. He didn't frequent suspicious places. He simply vanished into thin air," she told investigators, visibly shaken. The first 48 hours after the disappearance were crucial. The police searched city hospitals, checked traffic accident records, and questioned neighbors, friends, and acquaintances. Roberto's apartment was inspected, but nothing seemed out of place. His toothbrush, personal documents, and the spare keys to the store were all there, suggesting he had planned to return. The only item missing was the brown leather briefcase he carried to work every day. A key witness emerged on the 3rd day of the investigation. Antonio Gomez, a street vendor who worked near Roberto's store, claimed to have seen the merchant entering a commercial building on Rua dos Tupinambás, about 200 meters from his establishment, around 8 o'clock that morning. "He was talking to a taller man in a dark suit. It seemed like a normal conversation. I didn't see anything suspicious," Antonio told the police. The building in question, the Tupinambás building, was a 7-story commercial structure built in the 1950s, housing various law firms, accounting offices, and an insurance agency on the ground floor. The building's administration was contacted, but no official record of Roberto's entry was found, as the building lacked any access control system at the time. The weeks following Roberto Carlos Mendes's disappearance were marked by an intense but frustrating investigation. Detective Helio Matos, who was in charge of the case, assembled a task force of 5 investigators to comb through every possible lead. Security cameras, so common today, were practically non-existent in downtown Belo Horizonte in 1980, which enormously complicated the police's work. "We are working with all hypotheses: kidnapping, voluntary flight, an accident, or even a premeditated crime," Detective Matos stated at a press conference 10 days after the disappearance. Roberto's family, however, vehemently rejected the possibility of a voluntary disappearance. My brother had just taken out a loan to expand the store. He had plans. He was excited about the future. Why would he run away? Questioned Maria Helena, who became the family's spokesperson in the relentless search for her brother's whereabouts. The store's accounting records were meticulously examined. Roberto kept detailed records of all transactions. There was no evidence of financial problems or embezzlement. His bank statements showed a stable financial life with no suspicious activity. The loan Maria Helena mentioned had been approved a week before his disappearance for 350,000 cruceros, a substantial sum intended for purchasing new inventory and renovating the store. A new line of inquiry emerged when Jose Antonio, Roberto's employee, mentioned a dissatisfied customer who had made threats 2 weeks before the disappearance. He was a man who bought a large batch of materials for a construction project. He came back later saying some of the material was defective and demanded a full refund. Mr. Roberto offered to replace only the faulty parts, but the man became furious. Jose recounted. The customer in question, Paulo Ferreira, a 52-year-old contractor, was located and interrogated. Despite his explosive temper, he had a solid alibi for the day of the disappearance. He was in Juiz de Fora, 280 kilometers from Belo Horizonte, supervising a construction site, a fact confirmed by several employees and a local hotel registry. Meanwhile, the Tupinambás building, the last place Roberto was reportedly seen, was investigated floor by floor. Employees were interviewed and offices were searched with judicial authorization, but no trace of the merchant was found. The building's doorman at the time, 61-year-old Geraldo Almeida, did not remember seeing Roberto that morning, but admitted that the flow of people was heavy, and it was impossible to remember everyone who came and went. An intriguing clue surfaced when police interviewed Clarice Oliveira, a secretary at a law firm on the building's 4th floor. That week I noticed a strange smell in the hallway near the emergency staircase. I mentioned it to the janitor, but he said it was probably a plumbing problem, she reported. The janitor, Jorge Santos, confirmed her account, but said he had checked the pipes and found nothing unusual. 3 months after the disappearance, the case began to go cold. Leads dried up, witnesses offered no new information, and the police, pressured by other cases, gradually reduced the resources dedicated to the investigation. Roberto's family, however, did not give up. Maria Helena hired a private investigator, Arnaldo Neves, a former police officer with 25 years of experience. Neves took a different approach, focusing on Roberto's last phone contacts and possible connections within the Tupinambás building. I discovered that Roberto had called a phone number registered to Marcos Pereira, a lawyer with an office on the 5th floor of the Tupinambás building, 3 times in the week before he disappeared, Neves revealed in his preliminary report. When questioned, Marcos Pereira admitted to knowing Roberto, but denied any involvement in his disappearance. He consulted me on matters related to the loan he was negotiating. Nothing more than that, the lawyer stated. Phone records confirmed the calls were made, but not the content of the conversations. The investigation reached a stalemate. In September 1980, Detective Helio Matos, pressured by the family and the local press, declared, "We will continue to investigate, but we need new leads. We ask the public to report any information, no matter how small it may seem." The case of Roberto Carlos Mendes gradually joined the statistics of Brazil's unsolved disappearances. His family kept hope alive, distributing flyers with his photo. Maria Helena even appeared on a local television program, pleading for information. But time passed, and no answers came. December 1987. 7 years after Roberto Carlos Mendes vanished, the Tupinambás building was undergoing a complete renovation. On the morning of December 3rd, A gruesome discovery would completely change the course of the cold case. Josias Pereira, a 34-year-old bricklayer, was demolishing a false wall in the fifth-floor corridor near the emergency staircase when he encountered something that made his blood run cold. When I broke through the wall, I saw what looked like fabric. I thought it was some kind of old insulation. But when I removed more bricks, I saw a shoe. And then I realized it was a body. Josias recounted, still in shock, to Detective Claudio Montero, who had taken over the case after Helio Matos's retirement. The medical examiner was immediately called to the scene. The body, in an advanced state of decomposition, was in a vertical position inside the wall, as if it had been placed there standing up before being sealed in. It was wearing a gray suit, and next to the remains, a brown leather briefcase was found, partially deteriorated by time. The news spread through the city like wildfire. Maria Helena Mendes was called to identify the belongings. Upon seeing the briefcase and a wristwatch found with the body, she collapsed in tears. "It's his. It's the watch I gave Roberto for his 40th birthday. It has his initials, RCM, engraved on the back," she confirmed. In January of 1988, a dental analysis officially confirmed the victim's identity. The autopsy report cited the cause of death as mechanical asphyxia by strangulation, indicating that Roberto had been murdered before being entombed. The body was placed in that space while it was still fresh, likely just a few hours after death. The wall was then quickly sealed with bricks and plaster, a job that would require technical knowledge of construction, explained the medical examiner. The investigation was reopened with full force. The focus now was on the fifth floor of the Tupinambas building and its occupants in 1980. 3 offices had occupied that floor: Marcos Pereira's law firm, a pharmaceutical sales office, and a small construction company. Edificar Engenharia, owned by Antonio Carlos Magallanes. Investigators discovered that in the week of Roberto's disappearance, Edificar Engenharia had carried out minor renovations in its office, including the construction of a partition wall in the corridor to create a storage space. The foreman responsible for the work was a 48-year-old man named Jose Carlos Ferreira. When police tried to locate Jose Carlos, they found he had moved away shortly after the renovation was completed. A team was sent to his last known location, but he had left years earlier. The search intensified, and in March 1988, he was found in Goiânia, living under the name Paulo Henrique Silva. When confronted, he initially denied his identity but confessed after being presented with irrefutable evidence. His confession revealed the disturbing truth. He had been hired by Antonio Carlos Magallanes, the owner of Edificar Engenharia, to deal with Roberto Carlos Mendes. Magallanes told me that Mendes was threatening to expose a public bid rigging scheme involving electrical materials supplied by his store. "I was paid 100,000 cruzeiros to scare him, but things got out of control," he confessed. Jose Carlos Ferreira detailed how he had lured Roberto to the Tupinambas building on that fateful morning. "I called him the day before, pretending to be a businessman interested in a large order. I arranged to meet him in the lobby at 8 o'clock. When he arrived, I took him to the 5th floor, saying I wanted to show him the type of installation we needed. On the 5th floor, near the emergency staircase, Jose Carlos confronted Roberto about the supposed evidence he had against Magallanes. The initial plan was only to intimidate him and force him to hand over documents from his briefcase. He denied having any compromising documents. He got nervous, tried to leave. I grabbed his arm. We started to struggle, and I ended up squeezing his neck too hard. When I realized what had happened, he was already dead," Jose Carlos confessed, deeply disturbed as he recounted the crime. The killer said he panicked and called Magalhães, who ordered him to hide the body immediately. I was already renovating the office, building a false wall for a storage closet in the hallway. I decided to put the body inside that space before sealing it permanently. I worked alone at night when the building was empty, he explained. Based on the confession, Antonio Carlos Magalhães was arrested in April 1988. After nearly 8 years of silence and uncertainty, the case of the man who vanished into thin air was finally closed. At first, he denied any involvement, but the facade crumbled when confronted with bank records showing a suspicious transfer into José Carlos's account, made just after Roberto's disappearance. The investigation soon unraveled a sophisticated overbilling scheme involving public contracts. Magalhães' construction company was systematically supplying materials of a quality far inferior to what was specified, with the profits split between him and corrupt officials from the city hall. Roberto, who supplied electrical materials for one of the projects, had stumbled upon the scheme when he noticed glaring discrepancies in the orders. He had threatened to expose them all if the fraud didn't stop immediately. He was an honest man. He couldn't stand corruption. His sister, Maria Helena, told the press when the details of the case finally surfaced. He died for his integrity. The lawyer, Marcos Pereira, who had previously admitted to being in contact with Roberto, also fell under investigation. It was discovered that he was the architect behind the fraudulent contracts for the engineering firm. He was soon indicted as an accomplice to murder and for obstruction of justice. The trial, held in November of 1988, captured the intense focus of both local and national media. In the end, José Carlos Ferreira was sentenced to 18 years in prison for homicide and the concealment of a body. Antonio Carlos Magalhães, the mastermind, received a 24-year sentence for ordering the crime and for active corruption. Marcos Pereira was condemned to 8 years for his role as an accomplice and for obstructing justice. The case of Roberto Carlos Mendes left a deep and lasting scar on the society of Belo Horizonte. The fact that he had been entombed within the walls of the Tupinambás building, a place thousands of people passed by every day for years, never imagining the horror hidden behind the plaster, sent shockwaves through the community, prompting a profound reflection on how dark secrets can lie concealed in plain sight. For Roberto's family, especially his sister Maria Helena, who never gave up her search for answers, the resolution was a bittersweet mixture of relief and renewed pain. At least now we can give my brother a dignified burial. He can finally rest in peace, she declared after the funeral, which was held in December 1988, nearly 9 years after he had vanished. The Tupinambás building, forever marked by its macabre history, underwent a complete revitalization after the case. The area where the body was found was entirely remodeled, and on the initiative of the new owners, a small plaque in memory of Roberto Carlos Mendes was placed in the lobby. But the legacy of the case extended far beyond the resolution of a single crime. It triggered a wider investigation into corruption in Belo Horizonte's public contracts, which resulted in the arrest of 3 city officials and the review of dozens of suspicious bidding processes. The oversight practices for public works were fundamentally reformed, creating far more rigorous control mechanisms. The case also cast a harsh light on the systemic failures in Brazil's approach to investigating missing persons. In 1992, motivated in part by the Mendes case, the state of Minas Gerais established the Specialized Police Division for locating missing persons, one of the very first in the country dedicated exclusively to this type of investigation. 3 decades after its resolution, the legacy of Roberto Carlos Mendes remains a living part of Belo Horizonte's collective memory and the Brazilian criminal justice system. What began as a mysterious disappearance in 1980 and culminated in the gruesome discovery of an entombed body in 1987, became a crucial turning point for missing persons investigations across the nation. In 2010, Maria Helena Mendez, then 68 years old, founded the Minera Association of Families of the Disappeared, an organization that provides psychological and legal support to families facing similar ordeals. The pain of not knowing what happened to a loved one is indescribable, she explained at the association's inauguration ceremony. For 7 years, I lived with that anguish every single day. I don't want other families to go through the same thing without having someone to help. The Tupinambas building, now completely renovated and modernized, houses technology firms and startups. Few of its current occupants know the dark history that unfolded within its walls. The small plaque in the lobby was removed during a renovation in 2005, but it was replaced by a more discreet memorial on the 5th floor, near the spot where Roberto's body was found. José Carlos Ferreira served 14 years of his sentence and was released in 2002 for good behavior. Records show he moved to the interior of Paraná, where he lived a reclusive life until his death from lung cancer in 2018. Antonio Carlos Magalhães, the man who ordered the murder, died in prison from a heart attack in 1997. Marcos Pereira, after serving his time, attempted to resume his legal career but was permanently disbarred. His current whereabouts are unknown. Today, the Mendez case is studied in police academies and law schools as a powerful example of investigative perseverance and the critical importance of not prematurely closing missing persons files. If the family had given up, if the building had never been renovated, Roberto would have become just another number in the statistics of the disappeared, observes the now retired detective Claudio Montero, who led the final phase of the investigation. In 2020, 40 years after the disappearance, the Minas Gerais Civil Police inaugurated the Mendes Method, a specific investigative protocol for missing persons cases that establishes standardized procedures and minimum timelines before an investigation can be deemed inactive. The protocol emphasizes the importance of periodically revisiting cold cases and maintaining regular contact with the victims' families. The story of Roberto Carlos Mendez also inspired changes in Brazilian law. In 2019, the immediate search law was passed, mandating the immediate investigation into the disappearance of children and adolescents. Although focused on minors, the law acknowledges the critical importance of the first few hours after a person goes missing, a lesson learned so painfully in the Mendez case and countless others. My brother was a simple man who believed in honesty and justice, Maria Helena reflected in an interview on the 40th anniversary of his disappearance. He never imagined his integrity would lead to his death, but his sacrifice was not in vain. Today, because of the impact of his case, other families have a better chance of finding answers. The case also exemplifies how the truth, no matter how painful, provides a necessary closure for families. For 7 long years, Roberto's relatives lived in the anguish of uncertainty, oscillating between the hope of finding him alive and the dread that something terrible had happened. The discovery of his body, while devastating, finally allowed the family to begin the process of grieving and to seek justice. If you have followed this story to the end, it is because you understand the profound impact these cases have on families. Forever. Your attention is a testament to the shared human need for truth and resolution. Today, the issue of missing persons in Brazil remains a daunting challenge for the authorities. It is estimated that approximately 80,000 people disappear each year in the country, with many of these cases remaining unsolved, leaving families in a perpetual state of agonizing search. The story of Roberto Carlos Mendez is a powerful reminder That behind every statistic there is a life, a shattered family, and often dark secrets waiting to be revealed. As a society, we have a responsibility not to forget, to not allow these cases to be simply filed away and lost to time. By sharing these stories, we honor the memory of those who have vanished and perhaps help bring new light to cases that are still waiting for an answer. Because the truth, however painful, is always the first step toward justice and eventually toward healing.